Hello, friends. I hope you're out wandering through nature, exploring the natural world around you. Do you enjoy writing about your wanderings? Nature journaling is an awesome, fun way to remember all the adventures you have taken and how you felt during those journeys. If you're looking for some beautiful journals to keep track of all your wanderings, I have several available on Amazon, including some guided journals for children. Start your journey in journaling by clicking on the link in the show notes. Keep exploring the nature around you and keep journaling all your wanderings. Hey friends, Paul here. Welcome back to the podcast. Hope you had a great week. I was kind of reminiscing or thinking back about over the holidays. I always love the holiday time. It's time to spend with family and friends. And unfortunately, though, once in a while you do get to spend time with one of those people that even though they're related or they're a good friend or whatever their relation is to you, they have a lot of vocalizations, we'll put it that way. Yeah, they basically like to talk about their opinion to everyone else. I always look at the holidays as a time to get together and just enjoy the holidays. Talk about Christmas, talk about what your family's been doing. Don't get political, don't get all off on some tangent. Well, they know me, and they know I'm an environmentalist. They know that I am a nature person. I'm a science guy. And they had to say to me, because we had all this really cold weather, extremely cold weather, so much for that climate change, huh? And I'm like, oh my God. I just walked away. Didn't say a thing. I didn't want to get into it with them. But this is what happens to people when they believe all the fake news, if you want to put it out there like that, that basically climate change is nothing real because that's what they heard on the radio. And the same person actually found me later and he says, yeah, those scientists, they really don't know what they're talking about, do they? I mean, they keep changing their minds on things like, well, changing terms even. Used to be global warming. Now it suddenly became climate change. And I just shook my head and I says, hey, let's just agree to disagree and leave it there. And I walked away again. And I think they got the hint the second time because they left me alone. They just like to nudge me. They do this every holiday. But anyhow, I try to have patience and understanding for these comments and stories as I totally understand that not everyone is educated enough to understand that there is a difference between climate change and global warming. I also understand that many people don't understand what we call the scientific process. Maybe you remember back to, I think they started teaching it in middle school. If not, it was early high school. The scientific process and how it works. Now, this doesn't, however, mean that science and or scientists are fake or not to be trusted. It just means that the scientific process is at work and it doesn't work the way a lot of people think it does. So let's go back to our education because I want to combat the science non-believers. And the way I feel I can do that is to educate about the scientific process. And I'm going to do it in this episode. This episode is all about what science is all about, if that makes sense. In many of my episodes, I mention scientific studies. Much of my research that I do when I'm putting together or researching an episode, I always want to make sure I get my facts straight. I mean, I know a lot about nature, but every once in a while, I find out more about nature. So I always like to update what I'm talking about, update my own knowledge. That way I can pass that updated knowledge on to you. Now, much of my research comes from scientific research papers or sources that use scientific data for their information. I promise not to get condescending or political on this topic, so please don't leave. Don't turn the dial off or go to a different podcast. I'm not going to get political at all, I promise. So let me explain the scientific process. This may be a refresher, like I said. You probably learned it in middle school or high school, or maybe this is brand new and will help you to understand why scientific theories change from time to time. The definition of the scientific process is as follows. The scientific process is a systematic way of learning about the world around us and answering questions through observation and experimentation. It's a continuous cycle of inquiry and discovery, with each step building upon the previous one. Okay, so that's the definition of the scientific process. I'm going to try to break it down here just to make it a little more easy to understand in case all that was Greek, what I just said to you. Now, maybe you remember, once again, from science class in grade school or college even, the steps for the scientific process. Number one, the first step, observation and questioning. I mean, where's the idea come from? Where does the scientist get his ideas? It's like, oh, hey, I just want to study this. No, it's observing things and wondering. It's like, hey, why is that happening? That's where the observation comes from. And then the questioning. For instance, have you ever looked at something and wondered, how does that work? Oh, God, I do it all the time. That is the observation and questioning. I see something, it's like, I wonder how that works. It can be simple things, little things. Other times it can be bigger things. It's funny, sometimes we'll be sitting around, my wife and I, and we hear a word or we hear something, and it's like, she'll ask me or I'll ask her, what does that mean? And it's like, if neither of us know, we have that blank look. Hey, we look it up. We find out. Do we always remember? Not all the time, but a lot of times we do. Always discovering. So I'm always reading, researching things, yet I still find that I'm also always inquiring. I'm always curious. I think I look up answers to questions that pop into my head at least a few times every day. It's just me. I love to learn. Probably just as much as I love to teach. There are many things in the world that make us wonder. In nature, it could be wondering why songbirds sing more in the morning. That was a question I had not too long ago. If you listened to a couple episodes ago about songbirds or the way that birds sing their songs, that kind of made me wonder, why am I always hearing them early in the morning? And so during my research, I did get a few answers to that. But anyhow, that's not what this episode's about. Maybe you have always wondered why the tree outside your window doesn't drop its leaves before the one in your neighbor's yard. When questions arise, it would be easy to just walk away and forget about it. But some people like me, well, we need to find out the answers. Sometimes we question the answers that are already found. Maybe we heard something and someone said, hey, this is how this is. And it's like, really? That doesn't make sense to me. I don't believe it. I don't understand it. Okay? Maybe some new information comes along that makes the known facts, and I'm going to say known in quotes, the known facts are just not right. No, they don't seem right. That's when the theory is questioned and studied again. Those who question these things and then research the answers are what we call scientists. Yeah, the truth seekers, as I like to call them. So this is the whole observation and questioning stage of the scientific theory. And it includes when you think you know the facts. Maybe it's been scientifically proven already, but you don't always believe it. So you re-research it, re-explore, and maybe you'll get the same answer, maybe you'll get a different one. Okay, now step 2. Once a question is identified, scientists conduct background research. That's the next step, background research. This is where they gather existing knowledge and information related to the topic. So whatever you're looking up, whatever that inquiry is, you look up to see if anyone else has done research already. Why reinvent the wheel? Okay, so you're reviewing scientific literature, consulting experts, maybe you're exploring previous studies. All of this is to understand what is already known and identify any gaps in the answer to the question. No need to reinvent the wheel, like I said. If someone already came up with the answers, maybe there are still some questions, those gaps. Maybe those questions, they need to be answered. Maybe the scientist doesn't agree with the solution, or maybe they want to confirm the solution. So these are all reasons for doing the background research, looking up what other scientists have learned about this topic. Background research can take a long time, as there may be abundance of research to go through and confirm. I mean, you don't stop at just 1 or 2 sources. You keep digging until you feel that you have seen every source on this topic. The sources for research need to be checked as well. Is it a reputable source? This is a good thing to do no matter who you are. I don't know how many times I hear a news story that just doesn't seem right. So I do my own research and find reputable sources. There are some good fact-finding websites out there. I don't know if you've ever heard something on the news or maybe on social media. Oh, God, that's the worst. Yeah, I hear a lot of things on social media. It's like, no, that can't be true. The first thing I do is I go to Snopes. I'll try to put the link in the show notes. Snopes, Snopes.com. And they have researchers, I guess you could call them, people who are looking into all these different rumors, all these different statements that just don't sound right. And they really dig in deep trying to find the truth. And then they report on that. So they are the truth seekers. They're kind of like scientists, and they will find out the truth. So whenever I hear something that just doesn't seem right, I will go to Snopes, and there's a couple of other sources too that you can go to. Don't just listen to the news and say, oh yeah, it's on the news, it must be true. Well, depending on what news station you listen to, you're going to get conflicting information sometimes. I'm not going to tell you what news stations to listen to, which ones not to. There actually is a chart online. I found it many years ago that had all the different news sources listed on it, and they kind of set them on this chart to the left of the middle, to the right of the middle, or in the middle. The ones in the middle were very biased. They looked at all sides of an issue and reported on that. Other ones, well, they report a little too far left, and others report a little too far right. So it was a good source to look at to see, okay, are these reputable news stations I'm listening to? And then the people who don't want to believe that their news station is full of lies, they'll just look at that chart and say, well, yeah, that's not a reputable source. So take it with a grain of salt. Anyhow, good research needs to look for good sources. For instance, research about pesticide harmfulness to humans that is funded by the pesticide industry or the Insect Lovers Society, they may not be so objective. Yeah, one's going to go one way on the research, the other's going to go the other way on the research. Okay, step 3 in our scientific process. This is what we call the hypothesis formulation. Okay, so you had a thought, you questioned it, you observed, you questioned, I should say, and you looked up information on it, the background research. Now we are forming a hypothesis. So after the scientist is satisfied that they have done everything, a very thorough amount of background research, that's when they develop what is known as a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an explanation or prediction about the topic they're investigating. A good hypothesis can be tested. It's written clearly, it's very specific, and it's what we call falsifiable, which means that it can be supported or refuted through experimentation or observation. Okay, so this hypothesis, in simple terms, it's what the scientist thinks or predicts what the result will be. This is the answer to the original question that the scientist was asking of themselves. Remember that the hypothesis must be able to be tested and either proven correct or incorrect. Now comes what I think is the fun part of the scientific theory. This is the part I always like. Or sometimes it can be the most frustrating too, and that's the experimentation. We now need to test that hypothesis we came up with. To test the hypothesis, scientists design and conduct experiments. These experiments involve manipulating variables and carefully observing the outcomes to gather empirical data. Now, empirical data is data which is collected directly by the scientist. And you're probably thinking, well, all data, isn't that collected by the scientist? Well, the opposite, non-empirical data, that is data that's gathered from other sources. So the scientist isn't doing it firsthand. He's taking the word of someone else that they did everything properly in collecting this data. So that's why empirical data is more important. Now, controlled experiments are often used to compare the control group, which does not receive the manipulation. Okay, so you got one group over here that's receiving the manipulation in order to see what happens. And then you have a control group that is not receiving the manipulation, just to make sure that you're getting accurate information. Hard to explain. Basically, you're isolating the effects of the variable being tested. Okay, so the experiments are designed to prove or disprove the hypothesis. Having control groups is critical. You want to compare the data between a group that was basically had manipulation to it and a group that didn't. That way you can see if there is a difference. If there's no difference, something's not right, and you need to rethink your experiment. So in other words, if you get the same data between the control group and the non-control groups, then the manipulation didn't have an effect, which means the experiments, it was inconclusive. And new manipulations are tried, so you're basically changing things around with the non-control group, leaving the control group alone, and then comparing again. So you want to see a difference, and that will help you to figure out what's going on. Now, I'm sure I confused you by now. I hope I didn't confuse you. It can be confusing, but the easiest way to explain it is they're trying different things, trying to see if they help to prove or disprove what you thought would happen. Now, the anti-science critics will say that this is the point where the scientists will alter the data or try new things until they can prove they were right. That's not true. Not true at all. A good unbiased scientist will take the results as proven and they will present them to the scientific world. Remember, that the unbiased scientists are trying to answer a question, whether it agrees with them or not. It's all right if they were wrong, because then they will go back to the beginning and come up with a new hypothesis. That's the whole purpose of this, trying to figure things out. And if what you thought would happen doesn't happen, that's okay too. Come up with a new idea. Come up with a new hypothesis. You may have noticed at this point that I keep saying unbiased scientists. Yes, there are scientists that are getting paid big money by special interests or corporations who will ignore good scientific data to come up with a result that the special interest wants to hear. The 4% of scientists that say climate change is not real have been exposed as being paid by oil tycoons and have ignored sound data. It's been proven. I think I'll believe the 96% who have taken all the data collected and is neutral on the funding and experimentation. Yeah, so watch your sources. Anyhow, the next step is to take all the data and analyze it. This can take some time. Once the experimentation is complete, scientists analyze the collected data to identify patterns, trends, relationships. This often involves using statistical methods to determine whether the results are statistically significant and whether they support or refute the hypothesis they came up with. Oh, I hate that word, statistics. I remember how much I hated it in college. I just couldn't get it. It didn't make sense to me, which is strange because I always loved math. I always loved science all throughout high school and college. But as soon as I got to college and we got into statistics, it's like, okay, I understand math. I get math. I love algebra. I love all aspects of math except statistics. Just didn't make sense to me. Had such a hard time with statistics in college. But anyhow, now a lot of the data analysis is now done using AI and computers. This allows more data to be analyzed at a quicker rate. It also allows the data to be checked more than once for errors. So the data is actually getting better now thanks to AI. It's easier and quicker to analyze it. Now, the next step in the scientific process is conclusion and then communication. So you did the experiments, you analyzed all the data, hopefully with the help of some computers, and then you need to come up with a conclusion based on all that data analysis. The scientist draws conclusions about whether their hypothesis was correct or not, whether it was supported or refuted. They then communicate their findings to the broader scientific community. They usually do this in publications, scientific journals, sometimes presentations at conferences. This allows other scientists to review, critique, and build upon their work. So, in other words, if another scientist feels that the experimentation was not done properly, they can refute the findings. Yeah, they can come up with a hypothesis of their own and do the entire scientific process all over again. And their own hypothesis will be used. They can also use the original hypothesis and use experiments that they feel would create more accurate data. So it's not always proving the hypothesis, the original hypothesis, wrong. Sometimes they're trying to prove it right, but they don't feel it's going to stand up to the broader scientific community. So they want to take that data and try some more sound experiments, at least in their opinion, they'd be more sound. That's what will sometimes happen, is scientists will question it, or they will look at this new finding and say, well, that's interesting, that's great, but I don't think it's right. That's when they will try their own experimentation. So essentially, all this means that the scientific process is what we term as iterative, meaning that the result of one study often leads to new questions and further investigations. If the hypothesis is refuted, scientists may revise their hypothesis and conduct new experiments. Even if the hypothesis is supported, further research may be needed to refine understanding and explore other related questions. So in conclusion, the scientific process, it's a really powerful tool for understanding the natural world and advancing our knowledge of the natural world. It's a systematic approach. Scientists can make discoveries, develop new technologies. It's just amazing how it works. But if you hear a scientist come along and say, hey, this is what we believed before, we were wrong, we're actually believing this now. Why does that happen? It's not because the scientists are idiots. No, it's because that's part of the scientific theory. New data, new information came up, a new discovery came up, and it put question to that scientific theory, the original hypothesis, which was proven correct. So that's why things change. Global warming never became climate change. They have always been their own separate terms. It's just most humans, they don't understand the terms. And so they started combining them together, and scientists are just shaking their heads in the background saying, no, they're two different things. Just because one was discovered after the other, hey, that happens all the time in science and life. So anyhow, I'm trying not to get on the soapbox here, but it's just the science disbelievers. Hey, listen to me. I'm just going to say this once. Science is real. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about the scientific theory. So next time I'm doing an episode and I'm talking about, oh, yeah, I did some research and in this scientific study, you understand what I'm talking about more. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review, share it with your friends. That's the most important thing to me. Do me a huge favor. Share it with friends. Let's get more people listening to the podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast financially, go to the links in the show notes. You can go to my Ko-Fi page where you can pick up some really awesome merch. Encourage you to check out the show notes. Click on the links in the show notes. There's some good information in there. And have a great day. And don't forget, keep exploring the nature around you. Thanks, everyone. Did you know that plastic is made with oil, a fossil fuel that pollutes the environment? And did you know that only about 15% of all plastic is recycled into new products? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could live our lives without plastic so that we could stop harming the planet? Well, there's a company that wants to help you do just that. Life Without Plastic sells products that will reduce or eliminate your dependence on plastic. They have a large selection from toothbrushes to food storage containers to drinking straws, all plastic free. And it's reasonably priced. So what are you waiting for? Check out all these great plastic-free products and help save the planet. Just click on the link in the show notes to find out more and to start your journey to being plastic-free.